in October. And some other folks on council may want to speak to this. I feel like I've had to bite my tongue on the timing issue forever because quite obviously one of the issues here is that the legislature went into session in January and they only now are finally sort of going home. And for us to take action on this issue while they're in session would be somewhat ridiculous because they would just probably turn around and undo what we did. So we're hoping that look, this ain't our first rodeo, folks. We have been doing battle with the legislature over various items for a long time. This is chess, not checkers. So we're, please know that this isn't just something we've been ignoring. This is, this requires careful planning, and I'm still not giving away all the cards because it's not going to be over. If the legislature decides to come back into session between now and when it's time to file, I don't know what exactly we'll do. So I'm sorry if some of you are frustrated by the timing, but please know there was some thought put into that. And here we are, and there's still no absolute guarantee, but maybe with the new maps being drawn, I don't believe Senator Edwards, who's been the supporter of this legislation, will have any part of the city in his district any longer, although we know that also has not been an impediment for coming after Asheville by the legislature. In fact, the person who removed our primary was a representative from a suburb in Charlotte, so, right, who lost his election to the former Governor Hunt's daughter. I want to say that I don't take lightly taking on Raleigh because we have seen very real consequences of engaging in that kind of warfare. So I appreciate that folks want to push us and they are ready to shove us out front and to do battle on this. But for those of us who actually go down there and walk the halls and look at the climate we're dealing with, this is serious, and I think it's an important enough issue that we undo what they did again. And I think that we asked the voters to vote on this issue so we could have support from the citizens in this movement forward we're trying to work on here. And you did that. You did it. We also did a referendum on the water issue when the water system was taken. So we have, there is a method to the madness here, and we have been somewhat successful, but we have lost some things. We've lost some critical things. We've lost, for example, the ability to annex subdivisions that are built on the outskirts of the city that tap into our water system. We're the only city in North Carolina that can't do that, which means that you're looking confused because that is retribution for who we are in our position vis-a-vis Raleigh. So, there's going to be a chink, there's going to be a cut, there's going to be a repercussion. So you have to decide carefully what you're willing to take on. And we are fighters, and we have been fighters, and anyone who doubts that is not paying close attention. But I think this one is worth it, and I'm hopeful we'll come out on top, but there may be some more bumps in the road before we get there. That's all I have to say for tonight. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd like to say a few things. First off, I appreciate those of you who are still here. It's 9:03 on a Tuesday, so thank you all for sitting through this. I wanted to talk about two things that I've sort of observed throughout this process that I've kind of learned about Asheville that have really been sort of laid bare for me through this, and from the referendum all the way down to where we are tonight. And they're not really positive things, and I'm sorry to sound this way, but I think it's important for me to express here. And with all due respect, I've been listening to a lot of things since 5 o'clock, and there's a few things I wanted to say. The first is it showed me about Asheville about how we react emotionally to things. Like you all, I did not like Raleigh telling us what to do. I was angry. I voted against the referendum. I campaigned against the referendum. I like to stick myself out there as the poster child, for folks who wanted to be angry about what Raleigh did to us. And what I realized I didn't do that I should have done, that I'm trying to do now, is understand that we have the ability to make this change on council. What the General Assembly has done, and maybe not in a way that we would like to, but it's actually given us an opportunity to ask ourselves, what kind of representation do we want in the city of Asheville? We have that ability right now. We can change our charter sort of within what the statutes allow us to do. But we haven't done that in this process here. I've heard the word fight tonight, and I've asked the question here: what system best serves the average Asheville resident? And I don't think we've answered that question. We have not, as Mr. Wainscott pointed out, we haven't done community engagement on this. And with all due respect, Mayor, I don't think this was some sort of four-dimensional chess. We just didn't do it. I think we tried to avoid this and shirk it. I mean, I'll be straight with you. That's what I think we did for having been on this council. This wasn't strategic to be here right now. We didn't do it. And I've been trying to think about other ways that we could possibly do it, and I've laid some of those out, and I don't want to go into those too much in great detail. Ms. Tovish was talking about a pick three system and I agree with you. I think the pick three is great, and that's under what I was throwing out there. We would maintain the pick three system because I do think there are benefits to that. So in addition to this sort of, I think, reaction and not really asking the question, like, what really is best for us, we're missing an opportunity here. And even tonight, with all due respect, I haven't heard articulated why we think that returning to an at-large district is good for Asheville, or an at-large system is good for Asheville. I truly haven't heard it, and I hope we do hear from council members at the next meeting. The second area that was laid bare for me is this is sort of a sensitive one, and I realize I'm treading on some sensitive areas, but I think it's important. I'm going to read a quote from someone who had spoken at public comment on August 27th here. The quote was this: "I was really uncomfortable with lots of white people talking about what was appropriate for communities of color. I think if those communities felt like districting our elections was right for them, they would have shown up and said so. And so I was really uncomfortable with people who were not part of these communities speaking for them and feeling like it was their right to do so." That was a white woman speaking who had spoken several times. In public comment, since we've been looking at this issue, there have been two folks from the African American community who have spoken on this issue. We are a city that takes equity and inclusion to be a serious thing. We have an equity inclusion office. We've had them look at our noise ordinance. We're having them look at our policies for implementing affordable housing on city-owned land. On an issue as important as districting, as how we choose our representatives, we did not have the Office of Equity and Inclusion look at this issue. We have a racial equity toolkit. We didn't do it. We didn't engage. We didn't have community engagement in the African American community. I'll include myself in this. I didn't ask for it, and when I put out some of my proposals, I didn't consult the African American community either. And I'll be very honest with that. I've had a chance to talk with some folks over the past couple of weeks, and ask them kind of what some of the African American community, and ask them kind of what their perspectives were. And they were across the board. I mean, some folks wanted to fight, right? Some folks really felt this was Raleigh kind of coming in and trying to figure out a way of gerrymandering Asheville. Others were less so. Others liked the idea of being able to have a representative. And I realize, again, we have, and the reason I bring this up as well is, the issue of race and voice, and race, particularly in this issue, came up so many times, particularly for those who came in public comment and say they wanted to fight. But we didn't engage the African American community as an important issue as this, and we still have the opportunity to do so. And again, I don't know where, I'm not sure where it will end up. But I was amazed to see and amazed to realize that if you stay quiet in Asheville, if you don't speak for yourself, there are plenty of folks in the city who will be happy to speak for you, whether or not you give them permission. And again, I realize we have 2 members of council who are African American, but I don't think that should stop us from trying to engage the community, which sure as heck wouldn't stop us on other issues to do so. And I say to this as an Indian American, I hope you all, with the press or otherwise, if for some reason you wanted to get the Indian community's view on things, you wouldn't just ask me. I wouldn't pretend to speak for them. So this was just something that I observed on this. I still think there's time to do some good engagement process, to understand from the entire community what they think is important for them, how they think they may be impacted, and actually look at that in a real way. Because to this point, we haven't done it. And for us to say, look, we're just looking to fight and we're just looking to make a point, to me, is not the way we ought to be governing. So I appreciate you all indulging me in that. But yeah, to me tonight, I get the desire to send a message to Raleigh. I get the desire to do that. But I think we're missing a great opportunity in Asheville, and I don't think we're living up to our true progressive potential in this city.
Okay, again, we're not voting on this tonight, but is there anyone else who wants to comment before we move on to the next topic?
I would just have one comment. So these are all incredibly important and valid questions. And even though he didn't mention it, Councilman Kapoor is well on record with some other suggestions around how we might structure our elections and such going forward. And, these are sort of fundamental questions about our democracy, and that's it's extraordinarily important. And I'm always in favor of, having a conversation about how we can do things better. But I think, where I am tonight is we need to be responsive to our voters who have said that they want us to undo and restore really what Raleigh took away from us. And I think our ability to have a different conversation about some of these other options will be difficult until we do that very clearly. The one thing I would like to just put out for conversation, and not for conversation tonight, but maybe at a governance meeting or something going forward, is the idea of how we can respond to this question that came up several times, and we've gotten a number of emails about it, and that is, how that voters like the idea of having a council person that they can sort of start with in terms of inquiries and questions and comments and complaints and things like that. And so, what I might want to just propose generally is that we consider going forward kind of assigning council members to different parts of the city for purposes of that constituent services aspect. Obviously, anybody can always email anybody on council about anything, but I think sometimes, if we all get an email, one of us we may think, oh, well, somebody else will answer that, and then it doesn't get answered, and that's unfortunate. So I think there's room there maybe to figure out how we can structure ourselves to better serve our constituents and give people a very clear entry point into the maze of city government, which is a maze if you don't know it, and just be sure that we are being as responsive as we can to our voters and our residents when they have questions and concerns. So.
I have something to say. For the sake of people's opinions on whether or not we should do this or we shouldn't do this, or who we should involve, I'm going to speak from a personal standpoint right now. I'm the first black man to sit up here in 25 years. Gene Ellison was the last. I take extreme exception to the comments made by Councilmember Kapoor. Complete political puffery to manipulate who speaks and who doesn't speak for black people, white people, or whoever. Specifically, he was saying black people. and that people can manipulate that. I'll say this. The one thing that I have been for my whole entire life and can't run away from is being a black man. I was born and raised in this city. I never ever saw another black man sit up here except for Gene Ellison. White Daddy was here. A couple other people were here. But I will say this, as a candidate who had no chance, people gave no chance of winning, to sit in this seat, to knock on hundreds of doors till I wore out a pair of shoes, to speak with people in my community that I know and love, that they share their conversations with me, whether or not they share with anybody else on this council, because you wouldn't know. I've been here my whole life. And I do have the ability to speak for people who look like me. I've seen what's happened in this city from the time of me being a little boy to right now. And there is nobody that's going to sit up here and present political puffery to manipulate who speaks for who. Now, whether or not there's another black man that sits up here in 30 years from now, you will not manipulate what goes on. I was an advocate for our equity department. I was an advocate for our Human Relations Commission. I was an advocate for banning the box. I was an advocate for people accepting housing choice vouchers. And all of that goes back to people who look like me. So if you haven't heard from anybody that looks like me, you just ain't talking to them. And they don't want to talk to you.
Oh, that's not true. That's not true. That's disrespectful.
Okay.
That is just not true.
All right, does anyone else on council have?
I want to say something just because, I don't really want to respond to what I call foolery, but my heart is beating so bad right now. Since this has started, there has been just some undercuts made from public comment to comments from peers, and it's been centered around race. And to answer your question directly, Councilman Kapoor, they have spoken. It's called the referendum. They already spoke. And they don't want a different system. They want the at-large system that has produced consecutively 2 African-American voter candidates that they favor, period. And to change a system in this part of the game, slicing it and dicing it any way you want, could be at a detriment to our entire community. Not only Black people, but queer people, but poor people, people who are dispersed throughout this entire city and don't have concentration in one area in order to amass a vote. And for somebody to say that, oh, you can pick from 2 districts, you're likely to pull up a Black vote, that sounds like Jim Crow. You don't tell me where and when I can pick the candidates that I want to run for me and to speak for me. The system that we have in place that we're fighting for, the at-large system, is equally powerful in getting people in council, on council, as it has to keep people off council. And that's one thing we have not spoke about. The at-large system has power to keep people out. People who want to share their opinions just based on their voice and not experience and not because they've done the groundwork to get some type of idea of how people feel, like we see exemplified tonight. So to have this conversation repeatedly come up and be felt like you're made a mockery of almost because you have an opinion about a system that you know finally works for you after 30 years, don't take that lightly because you have a choice, because you have a voice to choose different. We're advocating for the at-large system because we see that it works and we have strategy to make it continue working. So for once, fall back and let us do what we know is best for our community.
Anybody else? Okay, we're not voting on this tonight. I just, in a, obviously it's an emotional issue, and I appreciate everyone sharing their comments tonight. I do love this council because it can have strong words with one another, but then work together very well. We spend a lot of time together, and like brothers and sisters. Sometimes we're going to have disagreements, but we're also good communicators, and we will work together in the future. So I'm going to keep remembering that. I hope we're not freaking anybody out. But
Sure. And Mayor, if I could, so I mean, to council members Young and Smith, this was not meant to be. This was not meant on my part to be disrespectful to you. I would ask, as something I think we would all agree on, is if we would be willing to have our Office of Equity Inclusion in between now and the time that this comes up to a vote, take a look at it using an equity lens.
Here's what I would offer. If you want to propose that, let's bring that up through a committee and put it on the agenda for consideration. It's not on the agenda for tonight, and it's very late, and we're getting like right on top of my bedtime right now. Can we please take that up when we have some time to discuss it and think about it?
Sure.
Okay. All right. We